Hello, everybody, and we're back for another week. My name is Pete Rohrbaugh, and I am an English professor in the Digital Writing and Media Arts Department at Southern Polytechnic State University. And this is our fourth installment of Conversations on the Serial podcast. With me every week is Rabia Chaudhry, so I'll let Rabia say hello and introduce herself.
Hi everybody, this is Rabia Chaudhry, and thank you, Pete, for having me back again. I look forward to this conversation with Adam especially. Thanks for having us.
Sure, and also Adam Bonifield, who is one of the 4 moderators of the subreddit on Serial. Adam, why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself, and maybe while you're doing that, you can give us like a brief introduction to how you came to be involved with that subreddit.
Okay, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Bonifield. Like Peter said, I'm one of the moderators of the Serial Podcast subreddit. You know, it's not that crazy a story how I got involved. I basically, you know, have followed the show. I've been on Reddit for a really long time, and there was just a lot of activity going on. Somebody posted about Anon, and there's just this very active community conversation about it. I was really excited by that, and how this subreddit was starting to sort of tell its own story alongside the show. I got very involved in that conversation, and later when the moderators needed 2 extra moderators, I sort of volunteered and was asked to join.
Just a side question, Adam. How does that happen? Like, is there like a metric to that? Like, how does a moderator on Reddit decide that there need to be more people, and how does that work get divided?
Well, it's different for every subreddit, and basically it's like once you can't handle your load, you realize you have to invite more people. Mm-hmm. And with us, there's no formal division of responsibilities, and actually we'll probably be adding 2 more moderators.
Okay.
And I think for us, it was just clear that this subreddit and this sort of community around Serial was just growing at a geometric rate, and so we've grown into more work than we could possibly handle, and So. But the person who started it definitely still does the lion's share, Jake, and he's really the guy who created it all and does really great work still.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, and I think I'll come back to some more specific questions about Reddit and how, like, what exactly constitutes the work that you guys do in that framework in a minute. But I was talking with Adam and Rabia before we went live, and kind of joking that if these conversations have episodes, then this episode would be the Reddit episode, because we really have almost too much stuff to talk about. That has happened relative to the meta-narrative of Serial in the last week, and maybe the thing that's gotten the most attention in the last couple of days is Rabia, your decision to delete your account and kind of distance yourself maybe from the community. So would you like to just tell us a little bit about your decision to do that, and if there was a tipping point to that? You and I talked about it a little bit offline over the last couple of days, but I'm wondering if you'd like to kind of fill us in on that story.
Yeah, so for me, like, when the subreddit, when I discovered it, I was really excited because I thought that this is a place where people are as obsessed with the case as I have been for 15 years. I mean, like, there's been no other place for me to have discussions about this case with anybody ever before, right? Like, other than within the family, within Adnan's family, randomly at a dinner party I might bring it up, but it was just, people would just be like, oh, okay, well, that's terrible, we hope for the best. I mean, like, you couldn't have a conversation. So I was really excited to be able to just be in the space, and I didn't find any other place online that it was happening where there were so many people who were like, trying to figure out what happened here. And I also thought that I could be able to just answer questions and comment, or if somebody's looking at something and not understanding this is not the full picture. Maybe try to fill in some blanks when I can. And I couldn't always do that because I didn't want to, I've said it many times before, I don't want to trump Sarah and Serial. And I don't know what information they're going to give out in the future, so I don't want to put anything out there that they might that might mess up their show or their work. But then I started realizing that maybe what I was offering was not of value to people, because it's really weird. Like, I've never been in a situation where I've been challenged about my veracity. Like, like imagine talking to somebody and saying, "Oh yeah, I was there. This is what happened." They say, "No, you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
You don't know. I mean, like, I've never been in that situation where it's like, when Sarah, there's times when, like, Sarah has more documents than me. She has done the interviews that I don't know. So there's times when I've said something to Sarah and she said no because, I know something you don't know, and I just kind of back off because I'm like, it's true. She has more information than I do. She has, spent time with people I've never met. So it's really weird to be in a position where people are like, just get the hell out of the way and let us have our conversation. And so I realized, and I don't know why at some point I started feeling like personally responsible to defend Adnan, to rebut every single thing, and it was just like kind of consuming me and making me feel really shitty too. And I wasn't sleeping well, and it was just, and there's other things that are happening. I mean, obviously I have work, I have family, I'm blogging, I'm traveling, I have so much I have to take care of.
Right.
So I was, part of my work is actually organizing social media trainings. I work with Google and Facebook at the New America Foundation to do that. So I was at a social media training this past weekend, and we actually did a whole discussion on trolls and how to deal with negativity on the internet. Yeah. So
you were like, I'm embedded in that.
Well, I was like, not so much the troll, but kind of the negativity. And one of the trainers, she's actually a close friend of mine, and I said to her, I'm just feeling really low. I don't know. And she said, just get out. Just get out. She's like, why are you doing this? She's like, unless you feel like you are a valuable member of the community, they really want you there, or you're getting something out of it. Like, what is the? And I realized neither one of those things. So when I posted on Twitter that I feel liberated, it wasn't that I'm liberated of people I don't like. It was like I just emotionally feel like, okay, I don't have to carry a certain burden anymore. Like, I don't need to be responsible to respond to people, and that was it. And they can carry on with with the party, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Adam, you want to respond to that and what that's been like on the Reddit side?
Yeah, well, I should say first of all that so when I sort of I posted to the subreddit saying I was going to come on and talk to you guys, and if they had any questions, I should forward the questions. And one of the most popular points was not a question, but just, can you tell Rabia thank you? And that a lot of people out there were just so appreciative for your involvement, and so I should definitely first relay that, and say that I know for a fact, and I speak personally for this, that I think you occupy a kind of like celebrity status in the internet, in this sort of internet community, and so maybe you got a taste of like the good and the bad of being a super celebrity, amongst a few thousand people, where people feel the sort of desire to connect with you and to challenge you and to be part of your world, and all of that can be very overwhelming. So yeah, but I know I get the sense, or at least I've been told by by a bunch of people, just to relay thank you for being involved.
Thank you. Thanks.
So but yeah, secondly, I think I'm not that surprised, and I think this is just a problem with a lot of internet communities, and I think Reddit definitely, it's both kind of immune from it in some ways, but really suffers from it in other ways. It's sort of like a problem, and this is sort of an unofficial slogan, to sort of remember the person behind the post. And I think for a lot of people, because it, just these sort of discussion groups, and Reddit is like the biggest of all of them. It connects you so intimately with people that you can't see, that you kind of just want to grab a piece of them, and it is really easy to forget that there are real people on the other side. And I think it's even harder because people get really upset, and all that negativity can come out when you're talking about, television shows, but if it's like, if that television show is actually reflecting real events in your real life that are incredibly personal to you, that's 100 times worse. So I totally get it. I get why that can be a huge burden to bear.
Mhm. Yeah, it does raise the question also for me, Rabia, that do you feel like you're going to want to or need to refocus investment in a different community? Like, everybody knows that you're blogging, and so you're going to be able to still kind of like interact with people that way. But are there other places? Are there other digital places online where you have thought, well, I'm going to dip into that side of the conversation instead, or no?
I don't really know what those spaces are other than like Twitter and Facebook. I mean, I honestly, there are things that I need to blog about related to the case that in between the episode blogs, right? Like in between that space, there's other things I want to blog about.
Right.
And I think, I could do that if I kind of just took back some of my time, energy, and emotions from these conversations. What's interesting is I'm getting more requests to be part of like actual in-person type of groups and, even like listening parties, which I kind of recoil from just
Mm.
even and I was like, listen, you guys want to listen, that's fine. If you want to have a group discussion about like serious questions on the case, then I'm fine, but I personally can't envision myself huddled around a computer listening. Like when I listen to an episode, I have to be totally alone. Every time I listen to it, I can listen to it 3 times, I still want to be alone because it is hard. It's very emotional.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be in a group in the middle of a party, to do that. So I don't know. And there's only a few episodes left, as far as I know, 3 to 4 episodes left. And then I think probably like most other things, we're just going to forget about it. I think the online community is going to forget about it in a few months. So I have to now kind of focus on getting as many blogs as I can out about the case and doing some actual legwork on the ground here in Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's I think lots of more directions we could go with that, but I wanted to kind of shift focus to the question that I was talking with you, Adam, about right before we went on, which is in relationship to the meta-narrative of Serial, which I'm defining as the kind of stories that Serial, the podcast, is kind of initiating or launching. Back to Reddit, we have this thing that got posted in the last 24 or 48 hours where a user is offering publicly $25,000 for a 2-hour interview with Jay. Which, I mean, out of all the things that I've seen, I haven't read. I wouldn't say that I've read everything that's hit that subreddit, but when I came across that yesterday, I was just blown away, amazed, horrified. Not like surprised that it would happen, but then like working through all the permutations of what that might mean, what the motivations of that are, what the effects that might have on the story. And so from your perspective of I'm sure having discussed this with the moderators and with Jake, who is the main moderator of the subreddit, can you give us any background on that and whether that's something that we should look at with just like an internet grain of salt, or whether this is something that seems to have some kind of traction?
Yeah. So we did discuss it. We discussed it with the user who volunteered it. It's obviously like very provocative, and it definitely should be taken with a huge grain of salt. Really, there are 2 issues. One is sort of substantiating whether this person. Well, there are 3 issues from our perspective. One is substantiating that this person would actually be interested in doing this.
Mm-hmm.
Second would be sort of asking if it's where we could add value in the process, and third would be sort of saying like, could it even be facilitated even if this person was interested? So could we even get in touch with Jay and extend the offer, etc. And I think it's sort of short-circuited because the second answer is sort of like the second question is sort of like where we as sort of the Reddit community, as sort of moderators of the subreddit, add value. I mean, I'm not sure, or we weren't really sure that there was a real place for that. And there are a bunch of different things that come up where somebody will say, I want to create an official poll to talk about Adnan's likely guilt or innocence, or I want to create, an official T-shirt for the subreddit or something like that, where you can say, okay, well, this isn't something strictly related to what we do, but it sort of facilitates what this community is about. Mm-hmm. And then there's sort of like people who just have an agenda, and in this case, the agenda doesn't have to be good or bad. It could just be the agenda to get a conversation with Jay, or get a certain get a certain reaction from Jay. And if it's not clearly related to sort of broader goal of promoting the community, it's not clear that it's anything to do with us. That's not to say we're against it, but I think you're right to say it's the difference between kind of helping to facilitate the story being told and discussed versus just having an agenda to change the story. And so we're not that interested in the latter stuff. We're interested more in the former stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you speak to the before we kind of leave that topic? Can you speak to the veracity of that user's ability to do that, or is it figuring out?
Who knows? I mean, it's an interesting. I think it's who knows whether this person will or will not. But it's an interesting broader question whether. If it's the case that a conversation or interview with Jay would have some kind of material impact on this story being told, I think, and yeah, it's just hard to say whether it would ever make an impact, because you can imagine the kinds of things people would be interested in. Wouldn't be the kinds of things that maybe Jay would be interested in, or maybe maybe would ever happen in real life. I remember in Rabia's blog post recently, she made the point herself that she wasn't at all surprised that Jay wouldn't talk to Sarah Koenig, and if Jay was one of her clients, she would say, "Don't talk to Sarah Koenig," So I think, rather than ask the question whether this particular guy is that serious or whatever, you could sort of just say, is this the kind of thing that's likely to happen? And my personal reaction is probably not, but yes, but maybe. And if it will happen, now would be the time to happen, because as Rabia points out, that after the show is over, there might be a lot less interest in it. So it's a good time for kind of stoking enthusiasm for this and 100 other different projects.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing that, I mean, when I said before that this kind of thing horrifies me, it's it horrifies me in the sense that that the motivation of somebody to do that is really central. What is the point? What is being served? And as I watched that conversation spool out, it looked to me, and I may have been reading it wrong, but it looked to me like this was basically just an attempt to kind of invest something, invest some money in something that would prove more fruitful. And the idea of the pieces of this story and of this case becoming, something that somebody can, quickly put up a T-shirt about and stand out on the corner and make money off of. I mean, everybody will have their own attitude toward this, but from my perspective, that's kind of that goes in a really uncomfortable direction for me.
Well, and I guess I wonder, for somebody like Rabia, where, like you pointed out, the show's about to end soon, isn't it also an opportunity for advocacy and and to sort of get a lot of people, while they're most interested, motivated towards a particular conclusion?
What do you mean for this particular offer you're talking about?
No, I mean for anything. So, for example, right now you've got a lot of people who are really glued to this podcast who believe that, there were issues in the trial and,
Right.
there should be a new trial, et cetera. So, isn't it an opportunity to engage those people and try to make direct that enthusiasm
Yeah.
with something other than just appreciating the show.
I mean, I don't know exactly quite how to do that. First of all, because I am always going to defer to the legal team in this case, right? Like, I am not going to, and I've actually discussed this with Deirdre too, I'm not going to launch some massive public grassroots campaign and totally screw up what they're trying to do. Because, first of all, it might not be necessary depending on some of the results of their work. But having said that, I think that if I am able to, through the blog, at least keep the interest of people who really think that there was a miscarriage of justice here, which is what I'm going to try to do, and just keep them along with me as things unfold, then there might be a time when that kind of people power might come in handy. I just don't know what that's going to look like. The second thing is, look, this is a local case, right? There's like almost international scrutiny right now, but on some level, there might be like local politics that come into play, like the communities who are local, the people who are influential locally, how they interact with the state's office. There's just so many little moving pieces, and I'm just one of them, And but the bottom line is for me, because now the people who are taking the lead legally, not just the Innocence Project, but also the attorney who did the post-conviction, and he still represents Adnan, are people who are extremely competent and who I trust and who believe Adnan is innocent, So they go first, and me as an advocate, I take the lead from them. So if they say, listen, we need a petition with, I'll do it. But until and unless, I'm not gonna make any moves like that.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to kind of take a shift, because I wanted to ask, one specific question to Rabia, and then one to you, Adam, and I have a couple of more that I'd like to just kind of put out there and have you both, or have the three of us discuss kind of in an unstructured way. But before I do that, Adam, I did want to carve out space for you to bring your questions to the table, because I know that you collected a bunch.
Oh yeah, and I'm very happy to sort of insert them as we're talking about it. There are so many that various people had, and I mean, so many of them are focused on Rabia and sort of her feelings about the entire experience. And I think we actually did a good job of talking about her feelings about the sort of community. Mm-hmm. I guess a lot of people are also really interested in her feelings about the show, and curious why, and they, I guess, sort of as a community, maybe a lot of people see her as the starting point of the whole show, and I think that's fair. And they're curious why, number one, why that was funneled through like the media versus somewhere else, like versus through like a legal team. And then number two, is she happy with the way in which Sarah has gone about telling the story broadly? Those are basically the two most common things that people are interested in.
Yeah, so and I've talked about this. I've talked and I've blogged about how I got to Sarah and how I got to media. Over the years, like there's a reason for 15 years nobody contacted media or any kind of external investigator on this, is because there was an appellate. There were always lawyers involved. There were appeals happening. So we were hopeful that the appellate process would produce results. And the second thing was, we knew that we wanted to basically not lose a chance, like take every appeal that we can take, and then save, for post-conviction is when you can raise new evidence. So if, let's say, we had not hit post-conviction, but we suddenly decided to contact media and say there's this alibi witness and all this other stuff, and suddenly that becomes public information, and the state has it. The state can get to Asia before we can even file a post-conviction, right? So the strategy was that we would get to post-conviction. Now, when a year had gone by after the post-conviction hearing, like we had the appeal was filed, there was a hearing, we were waiting for the judge's decision, like almost a year, pretty much a year had gone by, and this is last year when I said, what, like all I'm doing is waiting for the judge's order. So there's almost nothing to lose at this point to get media involved. And I had been watching documentaries in which it was very clear that media, the involvement of media, made a big difference to the outcome of the case, because investigative journalists can approach people and talk to people in a way that a legal team can't. I couldn't, because as lawyers going into a case, you can't be contacting witnesses from the others. There's a lot of things you can't do that journalists can do. So that's when I contacted Sarah, and I actually didn't, I was looking for, I really thought I'm going to find like a local Baltimore reporter who knows the scene, who knows the attorneys, who knows the judges, who maybe has like, people in place in the community, informants, I don't know, something. I reached out to Sarah. It was a complete fluke. I did not know who Sarah Koenig was. I did not know. I knew This American Life was a show, but I didn't know how big of a show because I never listened to it, and I never listened to podcasts. And and if she wasn't going to take an interest, then I was just going to look for another reporter. I mean, it was, and her name just came up because I Googled, Adnan Syed, Baltimore Sun. I looked for somebody who had written for the Sun 15 years ago and covered the case. So it was a complete fluke, but I don't believe in coincidences, so it was meant to be, and that's how it happened. So that's why, and if you look at what's happened, let's talk first about the actual impact of her investigation. The Innocence Project being involved is directly a result of Sarah reaching out to them. Even though it was not, she didn't reach out to them to ask if they'll take the case, but she reached out to them, for whatever, to talk about another case that was similar. We had already tried twice for the Maryland Innocence Project, and they were not interested. So, we had hit a wall and it's been a few years since we even thought, we just basically forgot about the Innocence Project. We said they're not interested, and that's the end of it. So that's a very real outcome of her investigation. Now, in terms of how she's told the story, I think she's told the story exactly how it needs to be told, which is that she is showing like the deep fuzziness, the cloudiness, the ambiguities that are here, the difficulty assessing the truth. How do you give weight to evidence? How do you assess a person's personality? These are all the clouds that are surrounding the actual case, right? Now for somebody like me, I'm going to say I have clarity because I know Adnan, and I know I interacted with Cristina Gutierrez. I sat in the trial. I saw documents. I have a certain amount of maybe more clarity, but even then, I can completely take a step back and see how somebody who doesn't have that kind of intimacy with a case can look at all these things and make 100 different things out of them. And that's what she's showing. And that is the reality of this case, is that very little is absolute. So I think she's doing a tremendous job. And I'm not saying I love every single thing. All I would love is for Sarah to say, definitely I think Adnan is innocent. That's what I want, right? But she won't, and she can't. And that's okay, because even her very astute investigative eye shows that there's just too much ambiguity here. It's nothing's quite clear.
The point about ambiguity is really interesting to me, and this gets, I think, Peter, to what you're, the sort of meta-narrative that you were describing, that I don't know if you watch This American Life, but they do have this sort of style of sort of telling, talking through a story in sort of like the human drama of it, and not in sort of a typical reportorial way of analyzing facts and trying to hit strong conclusions. You see sometimes in the podcasts where she'll say, she'll look at stuff and she'll kind of say, well, maybe this is true and maybe not. And I'm curious, do you feel like she's going far enough? I know you're saying it is ambiguous, but when you write your blog posts about the episodes, you do a much more thorough job of sort of analyzing facts and looking through the impacts of those and coming up with reasonable conclusions based on them. I guess I feel like if I were you, I'd be very frustrated that that's not the style of storytelling going on here. It's much more about the kind of human drama behind it, and it's actually not as focused on determining for sure whether this person's guilty or innocent.
Yeah, I do feel certain. Like I said, what would have been great is that Sarah's like, I'm totally gonna prove this guy's innocence, right? But that's just, she can't put herself in that position, and I get it. It could be that she can't put herself there in that position ethically. It could be because she actually doesn't know. She doesn't really believe, maybe that's really where she stands. For me, it's hard to judge exactly where she stands because all she's saying is, I'm not sure, right? But for me, like, I'm going to bring a particular perspective because I've looked at these documents before. I know what she's talking about. I already have my conclusions, right? And I just want to lead people through how I got to those conclusions. So I try to fill in some of the holes. It is frustrating to me that she doesn't, you know, she doesn't draw certain conclusions, or she doesn't give kind of a fuller picture, right? Or a deeper picture. But then again, she's got like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, right? She also, and I understand another thing is this, that what people don't understand is that as her reporting is ongoing, right? Let's say in this episode with Jay, she made some conclusions that are really kind of detrimental to him. That would close the door for Jay to then come back to her and say, okay, maybe I will talk to you. Like, she is still in a position where she's still reporting and investigating the story. So I get it. Like, why would she do that? Why would she close the curtain on potential information or interviews or relationships? She doesn't need to, because I can do that. So I guess. Not that we're not in tandem at all, but I'm saying that, it would not make sense, I think. And also for her, I think for her the story's not complete. We need the Innocence Project to finish their work before she can put her I'm putting my credibility on the line, right? I'm putting, I work in all these policy spaces. I do all this really cool stuff that's not related to Serial. That's like, my life. But all those people, when I talk to people like at Homeland Security and all these government, they're like, oh, tell us about Serial, and I'm like, I want to talk to you about violent extremism, but okay. But in that dynamic, I'm putting my credibility on the line by saying I believe he's innocent. I believe he's innocent. So for Sarah to do that, why would she do that when she it's not, she doesn't know Adnan the way I know Adnan, right?
Right.
Yeah, I just want to jump in there really quick on that one too. What Rabia is talking about is kind of like foundational to me as a teacher when we talk about writing, which, like, from a writing teacher's perspective, the minute that you start talking to students about writing, you're talking about lots of things. Like, you're talking about reading and thinking and analyzing sources critically and coming to decisions about them. There's kind of like two things that I'm always kind of asking students to look at as they start to approach academic writing, and one is argument and one is narrative. And narrative is usually something that academically we kind of just discount. Like, academics or people who are writing, kind of like rigorous academic work should be focused on the argument and the reason, the sources that they cite and making sure that things are in the right order. But we totally lose audience and we lose perspective when we aren't attuned to narrative. And so between Rabia and Sarah Koenig, we have like exactly those two poles. We have like you're saying, Adam, we have Rabia's like really rhetorically focused blog posts, and we have Sarah, who is in this like I think like performatively ambiguous narrative space. Like,
right.
Even I feel like as a listener, even if Sarah had come to a decision, it would be narratively it would impact the narrative for her to be revealing that at this point. And so I like, as much as people are saying I want her to decide, I want her to go this way or that way, the one thing I feel like I can be sure about is that we won't get that until at least like the last 10 minutes of the last episode, if then. Because that's how a storyteller works. And the one other thing it makes me think of is I've been watching a lot of John Oliver lately. Have you guys seen this guy before?
Sure.
Yeah.
So he does this amazing, he's just a fascinating architect of media, and I don't mean just him, but obviously his whole team is working with him. But he does this really interesting thing where he kind of throws out all these kind of ridiculous, hilarious, comedic things, and then he will segue into this 15 or 20 minute piece where he really is making an argument. He's making an argument that you can tell he cares about, and he would love for you to go and do something to become an advocate or an activist for that thing, like his little diversion on state legislatures, or his diversion on bringing translators back from Iraq who are kind of like in this purgatorial zone. They can't come to the U.S. But if John Oliver were writing op-ed pieces to the New York Times, or if he were standing up in court making those arguments, they would be way less kind of like interesting and shareable, and they would carry, I think, less of an impact than they currently are, because he's able to wrap it in all of this narrative, all this kind of like humorous narrative stuff. What he did with the Supreme Court was just like amazing, with the dogs. You know, calling people to the fact that like this is the most important discourse that goes on in this country potentially, and nobody pays any attention to it. But I just, you know, like I think that the narrative component and the rhetorical component of Serial are really, really important for us to understand and differentiate. And I'm glad that Rabia is representing, you know, like the angle that she is, because it does help us, you know, it gives us some depth.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a long. My bad. All the people on Reddit who were blasting me last week for having long questions. I was trying to keep short questions, and then I went off on a tangent. So here,
I like listening to your thoughts, Pete. It makes me think in ways I normally don't. So thank you.
Sure. Adam, did that provide some kind of like closure or conclusion to the two questions that you had?
Yeah. No, it did. And it's, I mean, you know, it makes sense to me, and I think it makes sense that, yeah, no, it does, yes.
Okay. So what about this? Either of you, and curious to hear other people kind of like talk about this who want to add in ideas on the event page where this is playing. But there's this interesting article that somebody started sending around where Dana Shivis, one of Sarah's team members, says, interestingly, we're watching Reddit. We see all the things that are happening there, but you know, we've been working on this a long time. Like a fact that I think people forget all the time when they're on Reddit is that, you know, yeah, people have put, you know, 40 hours a week into this thing before you know, listen to the first 2 episodes and have solved the case. But she says that we've looked at all of this stuff and we're paying attention to it, but we have not seen anything that brought to the Reddit community that we haven't already thought or found ourselves. And I thought that was a pretty, I don't know whether I agree or disagree with that, or trust it or not trust it, but I thought it was worth some discussion. Do you think that there's anything that the online community so far has brought to this case outside of the podcast that has legal or truth value?
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay. I think, yeah, even in that thread, something a lot of people brought up was just that. Whereas Sarah seemed pretty convinced that there might not have been a cell phone there, or cell phone at the Best Buy, or I'm sorry, a payphone at the Best Buy. People did some independent research to sort of suggest that there probably was a payphone there at that time, or at least there was evidence to suggest that there was, that Sarah could have found out herself, or could have gleaned from the subreddit. Although I guess people wouldn't have looked into it until she made that claim. So there definitely are just things that people find out or could find out. A lot of stuff people find out is stuff that like we remove from the subreddit, because people find out pretty specific information about people, including how to get in touch with them and specific facts about their lives. So it's not her fault for not finding that out. It's also not the kind of thing that we want to publicize. But that happens as well. So no, I do think it's a missed opportunity for them, and I think part of this raises the question whether Sarah and Dana are sort of champions of this new mode of storytelling, or are they to some extent, resistant to it, and sort of like they're kind of trying to tell a story in a very old style, even as they are innovating in some ways. And so it's like they're innovating in the sense that they're serializing the story, and it's giving all these people out there the opportunity to follow along as it progresses, and getting them very excited about the fact that maybe there isn't a conclusion written yet, making them feel like they have an active role in it. And at the same time, they're repeating again and again that well, we are in charge of this story, we are on top of it, like, don't worry, we've got this under control. When it's almost suggests that this giant army of truth seekers are like more of an enemy than they are, possibly the best allies to have in this adventure. And I think that was, for me, one of the most important things about this community that got me so excited about it. I mean the sort of Reddit community, that they really were just this independent voice telling the story alongside Sarah, and often finding things that she wasn't finding, and or just coming to conclusions that were just different from the narrative arc of the story. So I don't think that's to be resisted, and I think there's this big opportunity here to channel that, not just for like finding out facts, but also to sort of like mutually collaborate around themes and storytelling arc per se. So yes, the short answer is yes. I think there's a lot of things Reddit can offer.
Yeah, you and I talked about this earlier in the week when we had our first. I'm sorry, Rabia.
Oh no, I just kind of wanted to play devil's advocate on that question, and I think the difference between what Adam responded to and what Dana was saying is not that Reddit has brought things that they didn't know, but Reddit is raising things that they're not raising in their podcast, and there's a difference, right? So
big difference.
Yeah, there's a big difference. So I think, for example, there are probably in terms of specifically, for example, the payphone issue. Sarah found out that there's no evidence that there was a payphone ever at the Best Buy, right? Now she didn't go beyond the Best Buy being built, right? Whereas Redditors found that there used to be a payphone back when there was a hotel there, and so maybe Sarah knew that, but Sarah was sticking to the state's case, right, which was a Best Buy with a phone, and so that's what she said. So I mean, like, if you're a little more precise about how we're looking at this, it's that I think Dana might be totally being honest and authentic, that there are lots of things that they know that they're not going to shove every single bit of information into the public, and because they're trying to craft a story a certain way. It could be they revisit something and all of a sudden, the payphone makes an appearance in episode 11. I don't know. But at the same time, I mean, what the Reddit community is doing is, like, when I heard that, I didn't know that. I didn't know there had been a phone there. So they're bringing things into, they're bringing information that is not being shared. Kind of like what I'm doing is I'm adding information to the podcast, right? And so that's definitely valuable. What I don't think is valuable is the idea, but I mean, you can't stop it, is like the idea that without the story really being over, like even in terms of what Serial's going to tell us or what the Innocence Project's going to find, that people are drawing like hard and fast conclusions. I say that having myself a hard and fast conclusion, but but other than that, I think some of the analyses are really amazing, are really on point on Reddit. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that I think less important than whether or not, like, technically speaking, Dana or Sarah knows about all the facts that are being discovered online is sort of like their approach to these big communities. And so it's like,
yeah.
You know what I mean? Sort of like if you say, oh yeah, well, I think originally Sarah made the point, like, yeah, I'm aware of this, and we mostly look at it because we're worried that people would be negatively implicated, or we're worried that there might be harassment or whatever. And it's like, and then that's totally valid, and we spend a lot of time worrying about that as well. But I think there's also space to not just worry about it, but think of it as this awesome opportunity as well. And I get the feeling that, there's clearly some effort being made to engage online communities, and they have like blogs that they post about it, which are something, but they're such small contributions relative to the amazingly huge contributions made by just this army of like people in Reddit and Twitter and Facebook and whatever. And so ideally, the person at the center of that storytelling experience wouldn't be resistant to that and wouldn't be just trying to champion this one version of the story, but would at least collaborate with these multiple versions of the story and allow them to kind of all mingle together a little bit. Not to say that the podcast should be any different, but that there should be some attempt to engage it ideally. Only because I think it would make the story even better.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're gonna work through I mean, like as they do serials part 2, 3, 4. As they move on, they're gonna learn how to use this as a tool. This is a matter of first instance for them, for me, for all of us. I mean, we're just trying to figure out how to play nicely together right now. So
That's true. Yeah.
yeah.
It makes me think of this thing that was reported a couple of years ago. I think this has happened more than once, but this team of doctors who was trying to find this either a vaccine or a cure to some kind of virus or bacteria, and there was tons and tons of data that people just had to sift through to solve the problem, and they reached out to this community of game designers and built a game that would kind of have people chewing over the pieces of the data. And in 3 weeks, they were able to solve this problem that would have taken the medical community so much longer to solve. And I agree with you, Adam. I would like to see, and I don't know that this was the story to do it in. Potentially it was, but maybe not. But I would love to see the next kind of version of this, whether it's Serial or somebody else, being able to kind of harness that crowdsourcing mentality. I mean, there's obviously, as we've seen, there's downsides and upsides to engaging that army, but being able to have the kind of central narrative be more perforated or permeable, so that interactivity in the narrative can kind of is more encouraged. That would be interesting. And I agree with you that that so far their perspective on that has been to keep it closed and just let whatever else happen outside the castle walls. That's what happens. It would, though, be interesting, wouldn't it, if something that happened outside of the narrative ended up coming into the podcast. I mean, that's as I think I may have said before, like that's a moment that I really would relish and be interested in.
Yeah, and I think Rabia is right that that part of the reason that's possible is because of the sort of nature of the program. So maybe as this continues and the podcast continues, there's no reason that another serialized story couldn't do that, or that this one couldn't do that moving forward. I mean, it's an innovation, and it's a space for innovation that exists because of this sort of different way of telling a story. And the story is not dead; it's living, and so as a result, real people can kind of interact with it and permeate it. Mm-hmm. It's a very cool idea, and I guess from my perspective, at least, like it would be awesome if we could sort of realize its full potential.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Adam, if that's okay.
Of course.
So do you think, I think the show, it seems like it'll be over by the end of this year, right? Like before the new year begins. Do you see the community continuing after that? What do you think is going to happen? I mean, I'm going to continue blogging about it. Things are going to continue to happen. But what do you see? Do you think it's going to kind of peter out?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question, I guess. And this is a little bit different, so the easy way to answer the question is to say, oh well, this comes up all the time. There's like Reddit communities that get created around TV shows. Those TV shows go in hiatus, and they drop off, and then there's a new season, and then people come back. And so in one way, you could imagine that it'll look pretty similar to that, like the Game of Thrones subreddit or the Sherlock subreddit. When there's when there's no new Sherlock episodes on, the readership dies down tremendously, and so does the community. But I think because this story involved real people, what would be amazing is if some of this storytelling could translate into real activism and involvement in those in the sort of real world stories. And I think Rabia made the point that that doesn't actually have to mean that there needs to be thousands and thousands of people following this story and engaged in it. It might only be 5 or 50 or 500 people who are engaged to some extent. And yeah, I think there's a real possibility that people stay connected with this story about Adnan moving forward because it involves real life people that they've grown very connected to.
Okay, we've gone a little bit longer than we usually do, although I anticipated that, and I appreciate the fact that both of you guys are able to stick around longer than half an hour. I think, Rabia, we've always been up against this phantom 30-minute clock that we've really never been able to hit. It looks like Rabia maybe is jumping back in. Are you there, Rabia?
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know. It just froze.
Yeah, sometimes that happens. Did you hear? I was just talking about. I was just saying thank you for staying on longer than we usually do.
Oh.
I wanted to go through a couple of things, kind of wrapping up. One is that we, as a couple of people have discussed and sent me comments about and stuff, we certainly are open to and interested in having people, join us like Adam has and like Saad did last week. I kind of challenged myself in the blog post that I put up today that I'm going to reach out to Sarah Koenig this week and see if she'll join us at some point, hopefully at the end. Who knows? But feel free, anybody, to suggest via Twitter or the Google Plus page where these things go up. Other folks, I've already seen a couple, and I appreciate the suggestions.
It would be interesting to get some journalists who are looking at the ethical angles on this, and I'd be interested in hearing that.
Yeah, me too. I mean, a journalism person was kind of where I was hoping we would go to next. So throw that out to everyone who's watching. Go find your favorite person who's specialized in journalistic ethics and deliver them to us. Also, I just, before we close out, wanted to say that two more things. One, that Rabia, you and I have talked about the direction that we might go in our next conversation or a next conversation as it relates to a couple of articles that have come out, or at least one article that's come out related to racial bias and racial privilege in respect to Serial. And so that is a direction that both of us have talked about, kind of moving into a different conversation. But Rabia, did you want to touch on that, or did you want to say something about that before we close out for today?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested in having that conversation, I think, a little more in depth, but, just really quickly, and I think I might write about this in my blog, is that, I was recently quoted in a piece on the All about the privilege of a white journalist. And the only thing I'm going to say about that right now is that if I had known the angle of the piece, I would not have interviewed with it, because I just have issues with that particular perspective. But I'll write about it. The other thing I would be interesting for me to talk about really is not just the kind of the racial components here, that were racial components in the case, the racial components of how we're looking at it now, but also the sexism that I feel that is in a lot of the conversations, whether the conversation about Sarah, whether they're about me, whether they're about Deidre. I'm a feminist, and I feel it, and I've heard it from other women too, that it's like there's some really problematic kind of issues that have been raised, like in that kind of a context. So I would be interested in talking about the issues on sexism too.
Mm-hmm. Next time.
Another time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, like, constantly I keep thinking about how the stories that wrap around the show end up, like pulling you, because it's so good, they end up pulling you in other directions that are worth exploring criminal justice, worth exploring the work of journalism and how that's changing, worth exploring new media, which I hope that we're doing a little bit. So yeah, I appreciate that as a direction for us too. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and maybe, Rabia, this is more your announcement than mine, but I wanted to make sure that people knew that potentially this week you were going to be moving in a digital sense. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I'm moving my blog from Patheos, where it's been housed, to an independent blog. And I will, probably put up my first post in the next few days before the next episode. And it's kind of a meta post. I think you'll like it. But I just am hammering out the technicalities, and I'm learning all kinds of great things about WordPress as I go along. So I feel, I feel empowered. But and yeah, hopefully the next blog will be up on my new site.
Yeah, really exciting. And I think when we have some more time, I'd be interested to hear you talk about. I mean, we've talked about this offline also, but like what influenced that decision? And
you did.
What's that?
You did.
Well, hopefully not just me.
Mostly you, but yeah. No. Some other things too, but definitely you had a lot to do with it.
Okay. Adam, thank you so much for joining us this time.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
And I hope that we'll stay in touch at least through the end of the series. I kind of would like for everybody involved in this kind of like synchronous component of this project to be involved. Maybe we'll have a big Google Hangout Christmas party at the end, and we can all camera and.
Say hi to Reddit for me, Adam.
Okay, I'll relay the mutual love.
All right, and thank you very much for everybody who joined us. We look forward to talking with you over the course of the next week and waking up early on Thursday morning, right along with everybody else, ready to see where Serial is going to go. I hope everybody has a great week, and take care, and thanks again for you guys being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.